For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi. On Talking Point today, we're looking at External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar's visit to the U.S. with Dr. Tanvi Madan and Seema Sirohi in Washington, D.C. A warm welcome to all our viewers who are joining this live stream, and a welcome to those viewers who will pick up the stream later on. We are joined, as we said, from Washington, D.C. by Seema Sirohi and Dr. Tanvi Madan. Thanks to both of you for giving us your time early in the morning.
Thanks, Amitabh.
With you.
Seema, is it correct to say that the mood in the U.S. administration has changed after what many say was a deliberate public statement by Prime Minister Modi made to President Putin at the Samarkand SCO Summit?
I would say yes, definitely, because so many U.S. officials at senior levels have referred to those few words that this is not an era of war, and they are applauding the evolution in India's position, although Minister Jaishankar was trying hard to say that what the Prime Minister said is not that, it's not that different. But I think everyone has noticed that India gave a kind of a public chiding to Russian president, and it was picked up by everyone in the West.
Tanvi, your take on bilateral ties post the EAM's meetings, as you've pointed out, not even eyebrows were raised like they were in the past when he met the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines.
I think you saw during the trip kind of the real breadth of the relationship and the growing comfort level and the utility that both sides see for each other. And I think that's important because it also means that when each side thinks that they're getting something out of the relationship that is a key source of convergence, in this case, global issues, but also particularly the balance of power and influence in the Indo-Pacific, read China, you do see then that the two sides also manage differences better, or at least try to kind of downplay them while still tackling them. And so you saw during this visit, on the one hand, the breadth, which was, meeting with the National Science Foundation group, business groups, also the Commerce Secretary, obviously Defense Secretary and Secretary of State. But you also saw, for instance, this visit this meeting that, these have happened in the past, but the fact that, now you have a foreign minister meeting a director of national intelligence, and you don't hear a peep. And earlier, as I had said, I think what you alluded to, which is, people would have said the sky is falling because, the Indian leadership is meeting with senior intelligence official and leadership in the US. But this is just also a sign of the growing comfort level. Having said that, you did see there are differences on Russia and Pakistan, and those are managed better when you have this kind of these other positive things happening in the relationship, and frankly, just a need for each other.
Seema, the External Affairs Minister spoke at the UNSC meet on Ukraine. At a press conference just before he left, he said, wait and see how our permanent representative, Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, will respond when the issue comes up. That is what President Putin has done just minutes ago, that is, annex those 4 parts of Ukraine. How do you see India reacting to that latest development?
So Minister Jaishankar was asked about what his position would be on the referenda, but he was very reticent. He just didn't want to say anything. We pressed him on it. It is not clear what the position will be for India, given how much mileage India has got after this sort of change in position. I would doubt personally that India would go back and support Russia in any way for taking these territories or declaring that they belong to Russia. I think it's very clear India has spoken very clearly and strongly about sovereignty and the UN Charter. And Jaishankar was in New York. He met more than, had more than 50 meetings with various foreign ministers. And his bigger aim right now is, to force this reform process to move forward. I would be very surprised if India sort of approved or went with Russia at this stage.
Sure. Tanvi, we've seen India abstaining for everything except the last two procedural votes, which allowed the Ukraine President Zelensky to appear virtually in the United Nations. Crimea, we were abstaining from in 2014. Do you see any change, or do you think we should have a change when the referenda comes up in the United Nations?
So it's not for me to say what India should do, but what I can lay out the pros and cons. I think the reason often, and I think Seema is right. You're not going to see India support the Russian annexation. It's just a question of, does India abstain or or vote against some of these referenda. It'll also depend on how the resolution is worded. But I think the kind of the reasons why India would be concerned about it is, as you know and your audience knows, India has views about constituents of or other countries supporting plebiscites, say, for example, in Kashmir, or people who've called for secession movements. Of right now the issue of this Khalistan referendum is going on. So India is not particularly in favor of these kind of referenda that are supported by other countries in both these cases, Pakistan, to kind of to support so-called as India as Putin put it in his speech today, self-determination. And so on a precedent basis, it's uncomfortable for India. India does not also want to support the idea of secessionism in general. It doesn't want to support the idea that a co-ethnic country can claim lands on that basis, on historic claims. That's what China and Pakistan both do with territory India either holds or claims. But also, you have the situation, as Seema said, India has no interest in endorsing a country's right to annex territory and violate countries' territorial integrity and sovereignty by force. Having said that, and so on that basis, you'd think India would speak out against it. Having said that, while we often talk about questions about the West constraining India's strategic autonomy, this is one area, because of Indian overdependence on Russia in the military defense, trade and technology space, it does constrain India's strategic autonomy in this case to, for instance, vote perhaps the way it might have wanted to because of parochial interests vis-a-vis Russia. And so the question is really going to come, how does India balance these two considerations? It does not want to upset Russia to the point that it starts hurting Indian interests, but on the principles alone, as both the PM and the External Affairs Minister in his UN speech, UNGA speech said, we are, whose side are we on? We're on the side of those who support the UN Charter. Now, on that basis alone, they should actually vote to critique the Russians. But as you know, India has been hesitant to condemn the Russians, who have been a partner for India in the past and continue to be a key defense supplier for India.
Seema, talking about partners, there was a Quad foreign ministerial meet also on the sidelines. How do you see the Quad's momentum developing? I mean, I think they've already announced that in November there'll be Malabar exercises off the coast of Japan.
See, if you look at the Biden administration, there have been 6 meetings so far since President Biden took office. So I think the momentum is great. Nobody expected, there was some speculation when Biden became president that whether he would continue with the Trump administration's Indo-Pacific policy. They have done so, and they've done so robustly. They're meeting and talking all the time. And in this latest meeting, they worked out guidelines for humanitarian assistance, because I think they want to show other countries in Asia that they've got their backs. They are very pragmatic in their approach, in how they want to help other countries in the Indo-Pacific region. So I would say there is momentum. There were deep discussions this time when the minister was here, with Secretary Blinken, with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, about all these things.
Tanvi, 3 of the 4 countries in the Quad have seen political change over the last couple of years, but as Seema was pointing out, there's been great progress, there has been progress or momentum. But you have been arguing in your writings that it needs to do more on the security front.
Yes, I think partly because I actually agree with having this broader framing that it's taken on, which of a regional solutions provider, not just a regional security provider. But I do think within the solutions part of what the Quad needs to do is provide security and stability in the region. Having said that, security, there are 2 things about this. One, security in its broadest sense. Which is its economic security, its maritime security. The Quad, there's intelligence sharing amongst the Quad as well. Their highest level consultations, for example, when the leaders get together, they are talking about regional security issues. They might not say the word China, but usually in their readouts after the meetings, they acknowledge that they are talking about the state of affairs, even vis-a-vis China and regional developments in the Indo-Pacific during these meetings. And so if you have that, all is part of security consultations. In terms of the defense side, I think you have seen more. So, we can say that, they don't like to call Malabar a Quad exercise. To me, that's a distinction without a difference. If that makes it easier for them to do it, I'm fine with that. I think at the end of the day, the Quad is a vehicle. It shouldn't be about the Quad per se, but what the Quad allows these countries to do. So that leads me to my second thing. Even on the defense and security side, to me, it's not, is the Quad doing something as the Quad? Is it the member states that through bilaterals, trilaterals, Quad plus activity, are they able to kind of do these, whether it's maritime security, are they actually being able to operate together? Is interoperability improving? Is communication improving? And I think that is happening through the bilaterals, which have deepened, through these various trilaterals, including hopefully the revived Australia, India, France one, where maritime security is a priority, that you will see more, I think, defense and security cooperation and collaboration with the Quad. I also think, for instance, habits of cooperation, even this new humanitarian assistance guidelines, this goes back on the one side to the Quad's origins in the response to the tsunami. But remember, it will include not just civilian agencies talking to each other, but the foreign navies and the defense ministries. So I think this is a natural course. Yes, there's some discomfort in the region, and I think the Quad member states will have to deal with that. But at the end of the day, these countries in the region also want this kind of help. And expecting the Quad member states to respond if they haven't actually got their act together and habits of cooperation is a bridge too far. So I actually think even for the region, it's a good thing that the countries are doing it. And yes, you do see the Quad, for instance, now doing Quad plus anti-submarine warfare exercises as well. So going beyond that HADR role. So I do think it needs to happen, but I do think it also needs to happen in the context of a broader set of solutions, so to speak, whether it's vaccines, climate change support, etc., regional infrastructure solutions and alternatives that the Quad is offering these countries.
Seema, talking about the region and China as an adversary, in your assessment, how focused is the Biden administration on China, on the Indo-Pacific, and how affected is it by the war in the focus that is on the war in Ukraine that has the potential now to keep escalating?
So officially, they say they can walk and chew gum at the same time. But if you see testimonies by serving officials, military officials, to the U.S. Congress, it gives you pause. And there are several critics who say that the US needs to focus more sharply on the China challenge and get its act together, whether it's the Transport Command or the Naval Operations Command. I've heard or read at least 3 testimonies by senior military officials telling the Congress that they cannot face a two-front war. So the critics here in DC say that the Ukraine war has taken a lot of the bandwidth of this administration, and the China challenge is sort of getting second position. On the commerce side and trade side, there are also some things going on that give people pause. That is basically sale of high technology to China that seems to continue because US corporations have been, lobbying very hard since President Biden came to office to sort of water down whatever the US Congress wanted to do in terms of blocking sales, in terms of vetting any new investments. So I would say it's a mixed picture, but perhaps Dr. Madan has a better idea. She follows China much more closely than I do.
Tanvi, I mean, is the US looking at, can it handle two fronts?
See, as Seema very rightly pointed out, there's a live debate on this question. Can you do both? And one view is, as Seema pointed out, that it's hard to do because there's limited bandwidth and there are trade-offs. Having said that, the US has done this in the past. It's a question of expanding the pie, so to speak, rather than trying to kind of split it. And so there is that debate. Having said that, what's interesting is this isn't in some ways a two-front war. One thing the Biden administration has been very careful about doing is not actually it's supplying Ukraine, but it has been very careful not to try to get involved directly. And part of the reason for that very explicitly, other than not wanting to escalate the situation beyond the point, is to be able to keep a focus on the Indo-Pacific. And so you've seen two things here. So for instance, just I think it was yesterday that you saw the Biden administration host a summit with the Pacific Island leaders. You've seen the huge amount of attention the Quad has continued to get. They made it a point to release an Indo-Pacific strategy, even as the Russian invasion happened, to make sure that people knew that this was not going to be a lower priority. And you saw, given the situation after the Chinese militarization of the Taiwan Strait, this is not something that they're taking their eye off the ball. The larger focus, and you saw this in the National Defense Strategy, where they called China that it remains the pacing challenge for the department. So I think the question, it's not that there's not attention, but the question is, are they going to be able to get the resources, even from Congress, that you need, because you need a larger set of resources. You need modernization. These are debates that would sound familiar to an Indian audience. When you discuss a kind of a continental versus maritime, what are the trade-offs and what do you expend? Second thing, I would like to say, when people talk about two theaters and separate, I think can you imagine the message China would have got had Russia done this and everybody just stood by and did nothing? It would have said that it can do whatever it wants vis-a-vis Taiwan, and it had an open field. The fact that they are now watching in China what has happened in terms of Russia not being able to have a cakewalk. Second, the sanctions, and not even and companies, even Western companies, not even waiting for sanctions, but just withdrawing. And not just Western companies like the Tatas and Infosys, Indian companies who have made a choice about leaving the Russia market because of the risk. And so this is having to give even China pause. And so needing to send a signal, these are not separate theaters, because China would have read the worst message possible if the whole world had sat by and done nothing. If Russia just grabbed a chunk of Ukrainian territory, and at the initial thing, it seemed the whole of Ukraine, and done absolutely nothing. And so I do think these theaters are partly connected in a different way, and not the one that folks often think of. Yes, it will require trade-offs. It will require more resources. But at the same time, I also think these theaters are linked. And the other way that has deep implications for India that they're linked is what it means for the Russia-China relationship.
Sure. Both of you mentioned 50 plus meetings of all sorts. I'm just going to take some viewer questions. Seema, if you'd like to take this one. Jaideep Godavi, who says in his UNGA address, the EAM reaffirmed India's position in the global south, and in fact, as a voice of the global south. Do you think India is doing well to lead on that front, especially given what he says is India's lack of interest in the G77 group?
Absolutely. I think this is second, this is like sort of a belated bid by this government to become the voice of the global south, because initially the Modi government didn't really focus on G77 or the non-aligned movement or the global south in general, at least not in New Delhi. But in the UN, I must point out that the Indian permanent representatives always kept up with the global south. But this time, it's very noticeable how Mr. Jaishankar has gone about, voicing the concerns of the global south. He kept on hammering on fuel shortages, food shortages, and fertilizer shortages. And he, in his press conference with Secretary Blinken, he said, in fact, even the bilateral discussions they had were framed against a global context. So this is, to me, a very interesting development. I think it has something to do with, obviously, trying to voice the concerns of those who do not get heard often, and kind of moderating India's position somewhat as being seen too preoccupied with Western countries, perhaps. I don't know, I'm speculating here. But the other thing is India is pushing again to become a permanent member of the Security Council. There, the votes matter. Every vote counts. If we are to get text-based negotiations, the General Assembly has to sort of approve that, and every vote counts. It was also remarkable how grateful some of these countries were. Their ministers spoke with, they attended the function to celebrate India at 75 years, and spoke with some emotion about how India helped them with vaccines, etc. So Jaishankar has become like the big, spokesperson for the global south this time. To me, that was welcome.
Sure. Tanvi, if you would like to take this one from Varun Pratap, will all these meetings help in sorting out obstacles between the US and India with respect to a free trade agreement? This is
very quickly, no on that, and I'll come back to it. Just want to say one additional thing to Seema's kind of very comprehensive answer. I think there's a balance. Having said that, you also saw some of these leaders from the global south quietly criticize India for imposing some of these bans on exports of wheat and rice, and even suddenly stopping, vaccine export. Now, for understandable domestic reasons, but that's another thing that has to be kept in mind. There is also a little bit of a China angle to some of these. China has been claiming to speak for the global south. Now, the global south is very diverse. They themselves are large countries, including Indonesia, that probably don't need India to speak for them. But China has been saying they alone get to speak for them. So I think one of the things that the External Affairs Minister was doing is saying that they are diverse voices. The other thing is, because of China's relationship with Russia, it's not, and its own preoccupations right now, it's not really been taking a forward-leaning stance on these food, fuel, fertilizer issues, whereas India has. So it gives India an opportunity on that. It would be interesting to see if down the line, India also, not just the NAM, which Seema mentioned, but the Commonwealth as well. What do these two organizations have in common? Lots of countries in the global south, and they don't have China in them. Does India revive its interest in them? This also comes at a time when other organizations that had supposed to be kind of the non-West platforms, BRICS and SCO, have now limited utility for India thanks to kind of the India-China tensions. But very quickly on the free trade agreements, I think this is in an odd situation where previously the U.S. had been pressing India to try to get a bilateral investment treaty or a free trade agreement. India had been reluctant. Now India is in a mode of signing these economic agreements, and the U.S. is more reluctant. So some of this is a timing issue. Now I think the U.S. is not in a place where it's interested in signing free trade agreements. You see this even with IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. But just like that, I think where you might actually see progress in the US-India economic relationship, some of it is just going to be business to business, but some of it is going to be through some of these supply chain discussions or kind of diversification and resilience, economic resilience and economic security discussions. I don't think you can get away from the fact that even in a supply chain discussion, it will come down to, when companies are making choices, they will look at import duties in India. They will look at regulatory certainty. So those issues are going to have to be discussed as well. But I think, on the numbers, you're seeing them grow. The question is the missed opportunity to do far more. And I think there is a window of opportunity in some ways for India and the US. But I think the timing is not right, at least for a free trade agreement. So you saw Commerce Minister meeting, a Commerce Secretary meeting the Minister, and then Commerce Minister coming here for the IPEF meetings. But I think you're going to see it more on the supply chain investment space than you are in terms of a free trade agreement.
Seema, EAM was quite blunt. We don't know what he said officially, but otherwise on the F-16 package to the Pakistanis. In light of that, 124 Just Madness asks, given that the US is supplying, well, not F-16s, but it's a package to keep them up to date to Pakistan and treading a fine line on India-China relations, are we back to balancing and Cold War era strategy is what he asks, he or she?
See, India has been critical of US military supplies to Pakistan forever. It's not a new thing. So in some ways, what Mr. Jaishankar said was unexceptional, in my opinion. He was voicing India's criticisms. He was a little more sharp and blunt this time. He said that the explanation that the US gives that it's for counterterrorism purposes doesn't fly. They're not fooling anyone, to quote him. We've said that before, many, many years ago. We've been saying that consistently. Having said that, US has interests in Pakistan. They need to use Pakistani airspace for whatever counterterrorism operations they might conduct in Afghanistan or elsewhere. So I think India understands that. Some of the criticism was meant for, I think, to satisfy domestic audiences. But everybody knows that the US-Pakistan relationship is no longer what it once was. The length and breadth, the wide scope of the US-India relationship is for everyone to see. The Pakistanis know that too. They're trying to stay in the game. They don't, the Pakistan army wants to have one foot over here because, Imran Khan, if he's become a real political question mark, Americans are concerned. And I think maybe this sustainment package of $450 million was partly also aimed at that. I don't think anyone wants Imran Khan back. So they're trying to support the current government and the army chief.
Tanvi, your take on the F-16?
I think what was striking to me is, for all the rhetoric, at the end of the day, what is smart about this is that India and the US aren't letting Pakistan and Russia veto the US-India relationship. Because this has happened in the past. where the US hyphenates on kind of India, Russia, and India does the same on US, Pakistan, and says, if you're going to be with us or against us. And what that has ended up doing historically is it's been to the it's disrupted US India relationship. I think you've seen, and as I mentioned earlier, recognition that this needs to be managed better. And I think that's the issue which will have to happen in the future in terms of communications, etc. As Seema said, this is a sustainment package, not new F-16s, and in an earlier time, you might have even seen that. So the fact that you're not seeing it also tells you about the extent of U.S.-Pakistan relations. Are these connected? And people often criticize, India-Russia relations aren't the same. It might not be, but I do think wherein you have to remember in the course of these internal debates within governments, when somebody says, look, this is not, people have said, is this to punish India for its India-Russia position? I don't think it's that. I think it's a question of saying, when you're having internal debates and somebody's saying who's advocating for not doing this because of India's sensitivities, others will say, but India is not sensitive to our sensitivities, and we need to do this for, as Seema said, for our counterterrorism reasons, to get overflight or whatever it is. And so I do think, at the end of the day, both sides will have to kind of deal with these differences they have with other partners. But as Seema said about, India, US-Pakistan relations, India-Russia relations aren't what they were in the Cold War. So we should stop behaving like this is the Cold War and letting these countries veto. I just very quickly want to say one additional thing. I noticed the question said the US treading a fine line between India and China. The US is not treading a fine line between India and China. The US has been the only country, I would say, that has named China. In fact, it has been more assertive than even the Indian government about calling China's moves at the LAC aggression. You've seen this from members of Congress in both sides, from both parties. You've seen the Trump and Biden administrations do this. And you saw the US provide intelligence, fast-track military equipment, and also provide weather gear from their own supplies when India needed it. So I don't think, in fact, the only other countries that have spoken out in support of India's position have been Japan and Australia, the other Quad member states, and to some extent France. But so I find this idea that the US is, kind of non-aligned between India and China a little odd, because it's just not the case. It has been pretty forward-leaning, at least on this front, and has made very clear that it's working with India to, in fact, balance Chinese power and influence all around the Indo-Pacific, not just at the border.
And Seema, the US and India both said they're working to sort out the visas for India issues, which are unbelievably long.
Yes, that is a huge problem. COVID had a lot to do with it, but a new reason that was given by Secretary Blinken is that the visa section of the U.S. Embassy is self-financing. So once the visa section pretty much shut down, that visa fees were not coming. So I don't know about that, why money couldn't be transferred from other parts of the budget. But it seems they are moving. I think the minister made a strong case that it affects education, it affects family life, it affects students, even affects trade to some extent. So I think Blinken took it under advisement, and just a couple of days ago, a bill was moved by 4 Democratic senators to clear the path towards a green card. Like if you've lived here for 7 or 8 years continuously, then you can apply for a green card, or it'll be somehow hastened. Now, immigration reform and green cards, visas, H-1Bs, all these it's a big problem. There is the Congress has tried to do comprehensive immigration reform for many years, but both parties have different views. There are a lot of vested interests, and things just don't move ahead. So I don't know whether there will be real reforms, but I expect the consular sections of various U.S. embassies um, to shape up sooner and have more appointments sooner rather than later.
Tanvi, and as you pointed out, the comparisons for China's 2 days and India's over 800 days for visitor visas is not fair.
No, because China's in an odd situation. It's essentially isolated itself right now. I mean, I'm literally isolated itself by shutting down its borders. So there's not really that much demand in for U.S. visas. Second thing is the sheer. It's the better comparisons are with other countries in the global south, particularly Latin America and Africa, and you see those numbers. That's kind of 800 days plus there as well. So there was another person on Twitter, I think it's in one of the threads I did, that actually pointed out how many days in each of these places, and they're all kind of 700-800 day plus. But even places like Tel Aviv and London, it's 120 days plus. So it is the reasons that Seema was pointing out. It's it's this odd way of kind of financing, etc. You also saw and this is different from the issues of kind of the student and work visas, but that's also hit India because India has amongst the highest demand in the world. 75% of all H-1Bs go to Indians. Indians had this year are the largest number of students, and so especially students were prioritized this summer. So I think especially on the tourist visa or the visitor visa front, that pushes kind of adds to the queue. But it is a global problem, and I think that's why they're trying to fix it. Just kind of on just one other thing, you saw that Minister Jaishankar was quite careful in saying we have offered help, but he's conscious of the fact that just like for India, visas are a national prerogative. Nobody, it is not something that you can press others. He was very careful about saying we can help where we want, but this is a U.S. decision because these things are national decisions, and it gets into sovereignty issues that India is also quite conscious of. So he's careful, saying we will do what is possible and are willing to help when where it's needed. But what he did is make the case, as Seema pointed out, which is this is in U.S. interests, whether it's economic, whether it's people, soft power, whether it's strategic. I think one of the things I pointed out is Indian tourists spend amongst the highest $5,000 expenditure, and this is where there's actually a trade surplus for the U.S. So it's in U.S. interest, but I think there's a recognition of the problem. It's just a question of needing to figure out and prioritize this to actually get it resolved. It's also a missed opportunity for the U.S., which is trying to make the case that it is a better alternative than China for many places. While China's been shut down, it could have had a lot more people coming here.
Sure. Tanvi, and as we close, could you just take these last questions, your comments on what Maili Kucheli says, sanctions on the Tibalaji Chemical Private Limited, and Dibya Borgohain, who says, did the US sanction Indian firms after the foreign minister's visit?
So I don't think these things are connected. Just for viewers who don't know, this was a Treasury Department listing, a press release about sanctions on I think it was about 9 or 10 companies. Most of them are kind of Hong Kong based or a network around that are involved in the export of Iranian oil that is sanctioned. Important to remember, by the way, Russian oil, for example, people often draw the comparison, is not sanctioned. So this is different. This is about Iran sanctions. This is not, I don't believe it's connected because the way the bureaucracy operates is this is a separate process. And it sounds like we don't have enough information. I'd like to say that. But it sounds like this was about looking at this particular network out of Hong Kong involving export of Iranian oil to China. And so this one Indian firm that has been listed, according to the press release at least, they are alleging that this Indian firm was involved in facilitating the export of Iranian oil, not to India, but to China. So we just don't have enough details. And so I don't want to comment too much more, but I don't think this is connected to the visit. It was probably part of a process that involved investigating this Hong Kong-based network.
Sure. Seema, the press release that Tanvi is mentioning says India-based petrochemical company Tibalaji Petrochem Private Limited has purchased millions of dollars worth of Trialliance brokered petrochemical products, including methanol and base oil, for onward shipment from Iran to China.
Yes, I mean, that is the thing that struck me most, that it wasn't that this company was buying stuff for India, it's buying it for China, like shipping it off to China. That is quite interesting at the very least. But as Tanvi said, processes in the US government, especially of this kind, are very separate. I don't think there's any connection with Jaishankar's visit. The Treasury has been investigating, and as you know, the press release also says that if there's an agreement or understanding worked out with Iran on the JCPOA, the things could change. So yeah, it is very. People know that Biden administration wants to restart and wants Iran to come back to JCPOA, and the Republicans don't want that, but the Biden administration is very keen. It's doing, a bit of a carrot and stick thing, perhaps. But since China is the main buyer in all this, it's basically also aimed at China.
Sure. Seema, Sirohi, and Dr. Tanvi, Madan, as Rajiv Sharma, one of our viewers, says, please like this video. And he goes on to say, excellent talk. So thank you both for your time early morning and for talking to us on StratNews Global and answering all of your questions as well.
Thank you.
And to all our viewers who watch this live stream and are participating in the live chat box, thank you. You can, of course, as Rajiv says, like this video and share the link with your friends and colleagues and family. There's a UPI QR code that's flashing on your screen currently that if you use, you can help support us directly, and you can also join our Telegram channel to get updates when we put them up on our website and on our YouTube channel. This is Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi.